Ah. Now it's 6:30, so we are going to start the session's event soon. Please turn off your cell phone, please. It's like a movie theater. And thank you so much for coming tonight. We are going to start today's session. Once people have your seat, then we will start. Okay, are we all ready? All right. So thank you so much. Today, our session name is Education for Global Citizenship, Empowering Our Interconnected World. To celebrate this year's high-level political forum, we prepare wonderful, worldwide renowned performers, traditional drum performers from Korea, and they're gonna welcome you all first. Then we will start our session immediately. Thank you so much. Please give them big hands. Please give them a big, big hand, please. Wow, thank you so much. That was wonderful performance, isn't it? Yeah, it is to really welcome all of you, citizens of the whole world, because we have participants today from many different countries, because not only from just New York, from many other countries, Europe and Africa and Middle Eastern country and Asia. So welcome you all. Now we are going to start our panel session to talk about serious one, education for global citizenship. We will mention how education for global citizenship will empower our interconnected world. So first, we will have opening remarks from Korea. His Excellency Ambassador Cheol-Soo Park, he's Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations. He's gonna come here in the front and gonna give us good opening remarks. Please give him a big hand. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think I have to start my opening remarks by thanking the group performance by Chamnuri for their wonderful and powerful performance. It was like a wake-up call for many of us after a long day, and maybe we can refresh ourselves for tonight's event. As a co-chair of the Group of Friends for Global Citizenship Education and staunch support for this type of transformative education, Republic of Korea is pleased to co-sponsor this multi-stakeholder side event under the theme of empowering our interconnected world through education for global citizenship. This afternoon at the high-level political forum, we had the review session of SDG 4 implementations, which is the first ever since the adoption of 2030 agenda in 2015. During the discussions, education once again highlighted as a key enabler for implementing SDGs. We are all aware that education is critical in the implementation of 2030 agenda and also for tackling various global changes we are faced with today, such as extreme poverty, rising inequalities, climate change, conflict, violent extremism, just to name a few. However, at this time of persistent tension both within and across the national border, we must seriously consider what kind of education we really need in order to effectively tackle these challenges. As I mentioned in my intervention in SDG 4 review session today, our educational system must adapt to the ever-changing global environment, and in this respect, together with our effort to improving literacy and facilitating the transmission of knowledges and skills from one generation to the next, we must at the same time provide education that could nurture compassion, empathy, respect for diversity, and a shared sense of humanity. We need to bring everyone on board and leave no one behind. And I believe this is what the global citizenship education aims to achieve. The idea embedded in global citizenship education is not a new one. In Korea, there is an old concept, traditional concept called 홍익인간, which literally means broadly benefiting all humanity. Similar concept is found in many places in Africa in the spirit of Ubuntu, which emphasizes the common humanity and interconnectedness of mankind. We need to take these wisdoms from our ancestors and implement these wisdom in our education system today for us and for our next generations. But of course, highlighting the importance and value of GCED to all of you, the experts who are expert and most passionate advocate of GCED would like trying to teach the teacher. Instead, I would like to emphasize the importance of continuing our multi-stakeholder discussions on how to continue to raise awareness of GCED to even greater height and tangible ways to implement global citizenship education at various levels, including international levels. Republic of Korea has been playing its part with other interested member states to promote and raise awareness of GCED. In fact, Korea, together with Qatar and other relevant UN organizations, including UNESCO, will be holding a side event on transformative education next Tuesday, to which all of you are welcome. Taking this opportunity, I would like to thank civil society organizations and other stakeholders for their strong and consistent support for the global citizenship education and in arranging many related events such as this one tonight. I truly hope today's side event will not only elevate the importance of global citizenship education further, but also add productive value to all of the work that has been done on global citizenship education throughout the year at the United Nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Park. Now, next, our co-sponsor mission, His Excellency Mr. Sami Bugacha, his ambassador charged the affairs of the permanent mission of Tunisia to the United Nations. Please give him a big hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you first for all of you for honoring us and coming to this side event. To start, I totally agree with Ambassador Park, at least two things. Yes, I feel refreshed and awaked. And more seriously, yes, we need to adapt our educational system. The problem is to adapt it to what? To the current world we are living, or to the life after Google, as someone called it. So this is the discussion. But let me start by saying that how big is our pleasure to co-host this commendable event together with the Permanent Mission of Austria and the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea, and also, of course, IVECA, UNDGC, and NGO Steering Committee for International Day of Education for Global Citizenship, among other partners. My special thanks go to Dr. Jung, founder and president of IVECA, International Virtual Schooling, for her tireless efforts to promote education worldwide. I wish also to welcome our moderator, Dr. Carlin, and our distinguished panelists who will enlighten us and share with us during the next hour their ideas, their wisdom and knowledge on education for global citizenship. Ladies and gentlemen, our world is becoming more and more interconnected, as we all know. We are interconnected in everything to a certain extent, not only through trade and economics, not only through politics, but also through media, migration, movements of people, diffusion and exchange of culture, arts, as we just seen, sciences, technologies, and ideas. But we are interconnected in the best as well as in the worst, facing same global challenges, of which climate change is not the least. This is why we need global solution implemented by global citizens. We need those fanatic people, as most of you in this room, able to overcome the small world around them to embrace the big world of everyone. It is only through an education of openness, tolerance, and mutual understanding that we can achieve this goal and reach a world of dialogue and mutual understanding. This is what we call education for global citizenship, as promoted in SDG 4.7, and this is the kind of education my country, Tunisia, is committed to support. Education was, since our independence in 1956, the main pillar of our development policy, as we were aware that human resources are our only true wealth. This national policy has achieved very positive result, of which we are very proud. The current enrollment rate in Tunisia is 99.5%. with the rate of girls higher than boys in secondary and university. After the 2011 revolution, there was a growing demand for a more performing and more equitable educational system, and a system that is in line with the international standards. A national dialogue was launched in a participatory and wide interactive processes involving the Ministry, of course, of Education, the major trade unions, civil society organizations, including in human rights field, and all parties relevant to education, from teachers, students association, parents, and support personnel. The process has led to the publication in May 2016 of what we call the White Paper for Education Reform, which we already started implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, while implementing SDG 4 is on quality education, Tunisia is focusing on 4 themes we consider linked to the establishment of an education for global citizenship. First, promoting a culture of peace and nonviolence. Second, promoting a right of the child to participation, including public participation. Third, promoting a culture of sustainable development. And last, fourth, promoting human rights and the rights of the child. Let me emphasize the importance of promoting a culture of tolerance through education in Tunisia to help build a true global citizenship. It is the culture of tolerance of the Tunisian society which played a decisive role in the success of peaceful democratic transition and national dialogue, which, as you know, was awarded by the Nobel Peace Award in 2015. I would like finally to point out that developing countries, particularly in my continent, Africa, still need the technological and financial support to assist them to develop and modernize their educational system and ensuring that no one is left behind. Achieving SDG 4 of Agenda 2030 requires the support of the international community, to all of us, to satisfy to the needs of building capacities of the African countries and respond to the aspiration of our peoples, aspirations that are growing with the wealth of technologies and changes we are living daily all over the world. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Excellency Bogacha. I was very honored to be called by you, and thank you so much for recognizing our all colleagues and committee. Here, now I'm very happy to introduce our moderator, our precious colleague, Dr. Scott Collin. He just had open heart surgery. We are so happy to have him today, so please give him a big applause. So he's an associate professor of the Long Island University Post, and also very much of an expert in climate change, climate action, geography. So he will guide us to discuss today's important theme. Thank you.
Good evening. And thank you all for joining us this evening. It takes something to stay here at the UN till these later hours into the evening. So I want to thank each and every one of you for participating with us this evening. We have a lively panel to share with you in just a moment. And as he just shared, I've had some interesting life experiences the last few weeks, so it really does help you to understand just how precious life is. And the fact that rapid changes sometimes overtake us when we don't even expect them to. And we have to kind of approach, I think, the SDGs, specifically SDG 4 in this call for education for global citizenship, with that sense that, you know, we're just ahead of a curve that will actually be developing and mobilizing over the next decade. It's essential, I think, all of us in the room understand, for us to achieve success on SDG 4, in order to succeed with the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Protecting biodiversity for the planet will happen in the next decade, or the loss of species will be enormous. And similarly, as the UN has reported, the next decade is absolutely critical to what we do on the climate front. Education is at the center of all that. Understanding that we are, in fact, global citizens is at the center of all that, none of which detracts from our national identity, our other forms of identity. In fact, it's the belief of many that this new path we're on enhances those more traditional identities. At the Brussels Declaration on the Global Education meeting that met in December, the message that declaration included, they stated, "We commit to strengthening education for global citizenship and for sustainable development, to promote values of respect for life, dignity, and cultural diversity, contribute to social cohesion, democracy, peace, and social justice, and to improve the accountability of education as a public good." So this evening, we're here to really explore how we can do that, using education as an innovative tool. And I want to thank the ambassadors for their helpful, encouraging remarks, and I'm sure our panelists will want to pick up on that. So without further ado, we'll move forward into this evening's panel, and we'll start with Dr. Jordan Naidoo. He's the Director of the Division of Education 2030 Support and Coordination for UNESCO. We're delighted that he's able to join us this evening. And just a quick note for all of our speakers, a gentle reminder, you each have 6 minutes for your remarks, and please pay attention to our prompter in front, who will share 2-minute and 1-minute warnings. Thank you. Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Cowlin. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, let me thank all of the co-sponsors, the 3 permanent missions, as well as GI, the Department of Global Communication. It's a real honor for UNESCO and myself personally to engage in this discussion today. I want to start first with the question that was posed in terms of how do we define global citizenship. For us at UNESCO, it's important to state first and foremost that global citizenship does not refer to a legal status. Rather, it is more a sense of belonging to a global community and sharing a common sense of humanity, with its members experiencing solidarity and collective responsibility at the global level. It involves valuing and commitment to respect for diversity, solidarity, and as I've already said, a sense of humanity. At the same time, while there is this call for a common humanity, we must emphasize, as with the idea of citizenship, global citizenship incorporates different elements, and its meaning is contextualized and sometimes contested. In other words, it can mean different things to different people, depending on the context and the society. In order to capture the diverse understandings of global citizenship, UNESCO has produced a short document that captures some of these different notions. And I want to refer back to Ambassador Park's statement earlier. He referred to 2 examples. One is from my own homeland, South Africa, of Ubuntu, which is a age-long concept, which means I am because we are. We are because I am. It is the fact that community is at the center of all that we do. And as the ambassador has pointed out, in Korea, you have the concept of ongik ingan, which again is to broadly benefit all of humanity. And I think both of these are ideal conceptions which we have to aspire towards if we have to achieve sustainable development for all. And also to note, there are other examples, and I want to refer to a 3rd example from Africa, which demonstrate that the notion of global citizenship is not a new concept. The Chart of Mandan from Mali was established as long ago as the 12th and 13th centuries under the rule of the Emperor Sundiata Keita of the Mandingo Empire. And again, with this, the central concept of the Chart of Mandan was the respect for human life, equality, and the fact that we are interconnected. I think this demonstrates that the idea of global citizenship can be seen not just as something that we should aspire to, but as an ethos, as something part of everyone's life. And I think that's an important point of reference. At the same time, it is something that is concrete. It offers a framework for collective action around citizenship, and it can generate actions and engagement amongst us. And I think within the context of the SDGs and the challenges we faced, as Ambassador Park referred to the discussion even in the plenary debate on SDG 4 this afternoon, it is clearly something that can reframe how we act together to ensure that we deliver on the SDG goals. Education is fundamental to the SDGs, and I would also argue that global citizenship and education for sustainable development, as Dr. Cullen has pointed out, go together as being fundamental to delivering on quality education. So a further question is then, how do we implement global citizenship within the context of education? And I think this is really critical. There is a lot more work to be done in terms of how do we empower learners to engage and assume active roles both locally and globally to face and resolve global and local challenges. As the ambassador from Tunisia pointed out, we are interconnected in multiple ways, both, and I like the term he used, both in the best within us and also in the worst. And I think this is where global citizenship really matters, to tackle those challenges which would make it impossible for us to achieve sustainable development if we don't do it together with the recognition that we are connected as global citizens. So how do we achieve it through formal education? I think it is about ensuring that every learner from early childhood through to higher education and beyond develops the full range of knowledge, skills, and attitudes and values to become proactive contributors to a more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable world. It is by integrating focused learning objectives in the curriculum. It is also by supporting project-based learning, going beyond the traditional forms of teaching and learning to allow students to connect more synthetically to their local environment, but also the global world. And I think this is critical. So I think I have perhaps 1 minute or 30 seconds left if I can wrap up. In a way, one of the critical things is, and perhaps we can have a chance to discuss further, is to look at how we actually need a transformation in education if we are to ensure that we can change and transform the world in and through education. Thank you.
Thank you for those helpful remarks, Jordan. If I could have you follow up just briefly, maybe you could just share with us a story that has impacted you in the issue of how we're actually having success with these educational reforms. In other words, where on the ground that you've been have you seen some real substantive improvements in the quality of education through this idea of active learning? Or I'll let you focus on that.
I think there are many examples, but late last year I went to Cuba, where they have a global conference every 2 years on pedagogia. And I was really impressed with the kind of transformative project-based learning with clubs in school, whether they deal with health, or climate change, and so on, where students are actively engaged in developing solutions with their communities. And I think we see other examples in other parts of the world where we move learning beyond the confines of the classroom. And I think this is a critical element. But also, we have to look at it as a two-way relationship. It's not just about moving children out of the classroom, but we also need to move the community into the classroom. The classroom is ever wide. There are examples here in the US of project-based learning. I know in South Africa as well, many countries. I don't want to highlight those and miss out some. So I'm sure we'll get some examples from the audience. But I really want to emphasize the learning that I saw in Cuba. And what was also impressive, it was not limited to basic education. We saw a true relationship between, for example, UNESCO chairs from universities working with schools together on particular challenges that they faced, whether it meant recreating, using local materials. I think one of the big lessons from that is the recycling of materials to create things that were environmentally friendly, so we don't really remain a consumptive community. And I think this is where we can see global citizenship as a real connector across all SDGs. It's not only a connection to SDG 8 and preparing for the economy, but it's on every single one of it. We can have an influence of education more broadly, but also I think global citizenship education.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Our next speaker is Dr. Holly Shaw. She's an associate professor at Adelphi University at their College of Nursing and Public Health. She's also the chair of the UN NGO Committee on Mental Health. Holly.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I wanted to respond to the moderator's questions of me, which is, how does my profession in terms of nursing, public health, and medicine respond to SDG 4, SDG 4.7, and really all of the SDGs? Can I have the first slide, please? This sounds simplistic, but nursing truly is the gentle art of caring. And it's the art of caring not only for individuals, but for communities, for the planet, and for humanity. Next slide, please. Part of the core professional values of nursing are, as you see here, very consistent with education for global citizenship. They involve human dignity, integrity, altruism, autonomy, and social justice. And these values extend beyond the bedside and beyond the immediate community of the healthcare practitioner. Next slide, please. Nurses have a crucial role as leaders in civil society, impacting the determinants of health behaviors and outcomes, including health promotion, reducing disease burdens, lowering risk factors, and developing a sustainable health and nursing workforce. And all of these activities involve many forms of education. Education of the individual healthcare practitioners and professionals, as well as education of patients and communities in health promotion activities. Next slide, please. I represent the International Council of Nurses, which is a federation of 135 national nursing associations and over 20 million nurses and midwives. ICN serves as the global voice for nursing, enhancing and promoting the nursing profession, but also utilizes the voice of nurses to improve the health of individuals, communities, and countries. Next slide. The opportunity to apply nursing knowledge to create a healthier and better world, we can improve all of these SDGs. And we believe that health and well-being are really fundamental to every single SDG, because without health and physical prosperity, it's impossible to create a world and a planet that is healthy, prosperous, and people-oriented. Next. We aren't only at the bedside, but we need a voice at the policy table so that we can influence decision-making processes and healthcare policies for our communities and also for the world. We need to be involved and are involved in policy decisions about resource allocation, about access to healthcare for vulnerable populations, and importantly, a sustainable and healthy global nursing workforce, which has been determined by the World Health Organization to be not simply a matter of healthy environments, but healthy economies, because a healthy healthcare workforce creates a healthy economy. We have a new campaign called Nursing Now, which is sponsored by the World Health Organization and Sir Nigel Crisp. And our patron, as you can see, is Her Excellency Kate Middleton. Nursing Now is a project that promotes the importance of nursing, the value of nursing, and the importance of nursing to health care of the planet. We have many activities throughout the year at the UN, including the CSW. Kate Middleton wasn't there. She was pregnant at the time, but she participated by telecast. Her mother and grandmother were nurse volunteers, and her children are delivered by nurse midwives. Next. We know that we need 9 million nurses to be trained worldwide by 2030 in order to keep up with the global demand. And we won't have time to read this, but Kate Middleton has often promoted the value and importance of nursing in terms of healthcare policy worldwide. Next. We invest in young people, not just for them to be future leaders, but to be leaders now. Our relationships with our students and our young colleagues, it's exceedingly important. I have a former student here who was a student of mine, I don't even know how long ago, 12, 15 years maybe, but we continue to be involved with students and young colleagues in order to create a legacy for them to continue. Next, please. Florence Nightingale said, whoever is in charge, keep this simple question in her head. Not how can I always do the right thing myself, but how can I provide for the right thing to always be done? And this indeed is one of the challenges that we have in instituting courses and approaches to global citizenship, is being able not just as individuals to provide for the well-being of others, but to make sure that every nurse and midwife across the world has the opportunity to do so. Next slide, please. Part of that is developing mutual reciprocal mentorships. Albert Einstein said, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. We need to adapt our educational programs in the United States and North America, as well as throughout the world, so that nurses can succeed in ways that are culturally relevant for them, and the ICN develops standards for all. Next slide, I'll wrap on it. Teachers, the mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, and the great teacher inspires. And that's really one of the major challenges for us in nursing and health and medical education throughout the world. Can I have one more? One's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never again retains its original dimension. And that's how we feel transformative education really works, that once transformed, an individual is never again the same. Thank you.
Holly, universities train our nurses and our future professionals. As someone who's a professor at one of our regional universities, what obstacles have you encountered either here in the New York area or internationally with universities moving more aggressively with education for global citizenship in their curriculum? If you can name just one or two of those obstacles for our audience.
Well, one is that for professional education, nursing, public health, medicine, we're held to very strong accreditation standards so that we're compelled to integrate all of the new technology, all of the new science, and that is overwhelming because that's exploding every moment as we speak. So trying to include the rest is exceedingly important and challenging, and getting all faculties to buy into these concepts is crucial. I've just come back, I don't think I'm back a week, maybe a few days, from Cambodia, where I've been very involved in the Cambodian Nursing Association, which is moving towards accreditation in their country and really trying very hard to develop practice standards and educational standards. And so we think not only in the United States or North America, but we're committed to helping our colleagues in all parts of the world where some resources are very limited. And only through collaboration and sharing resources can we accomplish all of the SDGs for all, leaving no one behind. But sharing resources is really crucial.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Ramu Damodaran, and he's the Chief of the United Nations Academic Impact.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you and Yoon-hee for having invited the Academic Impact to join in the organization of this along with the permanent missions of the Republic of Korea and Tunisia. Yoon-hee, I'm particularly grateful to you. As all of you know, the United Nations is an organization that lives largely by acronyms. And I'm not sure if all of you know that Yoon-hee's last name, Jung, stands for the Jewel of United Nations Globalism.
Oh, excellent, excellent.
And when I say the Jewel of Globalism, I'm trying to capture for you the fact that globalism is a process, as all our speakers have said, including our distinguished ambassadors, that is both irreversible and whose pace we cannot regulate or attempt to abridge. But the jewel lies in realizing that that globalism must have at its heart a person or people, or as the visionaries of the United Nations declared in 1945, the dignity and worth of the human person. And so that is what global citizenship education should be all about. Today, July the 9th, is an important anniversary in our host country. It was on this day in 1868 that the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution was ratified, which gave every African American in this country full citizenship. And I use that as an analogy to try and suggest to you the tremendous distance, a conquerable distance there is, between the declaration and the granting of citizenship and the realization of its fruits and value. Because you can have a normal, a legal, normative definition which people accept, but until that is respected by other people around you, unless they are willing to extend to you the rights of a citizen and the rights of being equal to them as citizens, then the battle is lost. And that, to my mind, is a lesson for global citizenship. We have heard of the year 2015. Ambassador Bugasha mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize that year. The year 2015, if I can bring in another acronym, was the first year that we at the United Nations celebrated the International Day of Yoga. And YOGA made 2015 the year of global action. And that also hints to something about global citizenship. My distinguished NGO friend, Dr. Meenakshi Padmanabhiah, who is here, has talked about yoga as both a science and an art. And I think that goes for global citizenship as well. At one level, it is a science because we communicate to each other as global citizens in the fields of technology, of communication, trying to bring together areas, as Holly amply demonstrated, of public health, as Dr. Naidu spoke of, the pedagogical aspects of it. These are sciences. But beyond that, it is an art that ultimately depends upon the human heart and the will of the human heart to survive. And so when we spoke about everyday lives, let us think of what President Moon Jae-in of the Republic of Korea said, that he longs for a day when peace is part of everyday life. And you look at that idea of peace, it's not just peace among nations, which this organization tries to broker so well. It's peace among peoples, and I would venture to go further and say it's peace within peoples. And that peace is only assured when you realize that both the problems that beset you and the joys that you are fortunate to have are shared in other parts of the world. It is something which the great Tunisian poet Amina Said had a wonderful book of poems where the title is The Present Tense of the World. Think of it. We're always living in the present tense. What I read now in my email will be last century's newspaper 5 minutes from now. And that sense of living now, and as she went on to say, this endless wandering becomes my language. That is global citizenship. We are all wandering in mind, in body, in spirit. And that enables us to meet, to accept, to understand, to extend, but also inhibits us. Because the more we wander, the more we face dangers, physical dangers, whether it's that of disease or narcotics or, as was mentioned by the ambassador, climate change. This is what, in the year of global action, the Sustainable Development Goals were able to do. And I want to pay particular tribute to Ambassador Park's distinguished predecessor, Ambassador Chung-Hee Han, who piloted the inclusion in Goal 4.7 of the concept of global citizenship education. And I would like to conclude with a tribute to two great, I'm privileged to call them friends, I had from Tunisia and the Republic of Korea, who are no longer with us. One of my former bosses, Hedi Anabi, who was a Tunisian diplomat who brought to the United Nations, to Cambodia where Holly was. He oversaw Cambodia's transition to independence, true independence. And then he went on to Haiti, where in the earthquake of 2010, he laid down his life. And the former president of Handong Global University, Yonggil Kim, who died 2 weeks ago, who created the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Education in support of the United Nations academic impact on his campus. To their memory, I think, this event is tribute. Global citizenship is at the heart of the United Nations, and the United Nations is at the heart of the global citizen. Thank you.
Ramu, what will happen with education for global citizenship in the next decade? You were extraordinarily eloquent with all that you just shared, but I'm going to ask for some greater powers on your behalf in terms of forecasting abilities. Are we in the same place 5, 7 years from now with these concepts, trying to get them instilled, or will this blossom in some fuller way rather quickly?
My sense, Scott, is that the entire idea of education, as we know it today, is going to be so rapidly transformed within not only our lifetimes, but within the next 5 to 7 years on at least 3 levels. First of all, as Dr. Naidu pointed out, education will no longer belong in the classroom, but more a concept that was again introduced into the SDG report. The idea of lifelong education will make us continuous learners. And in that process, all that we enjoy and cherish and savor, whether we like it or not, will be an education. The second point is that education will allow us to understand other peoples and other cultures through the very simple process of understanding ourselves. Because ultimately, if I come to terms with myself as an Indian, I can come to terms with someone from Iceland or from Paraguay because their parameters are the same. And the third, and I think the most important, is that education will increasingly, without effort, be seen to have a social purpose. We've already seen it in the case of the global movement on climate change. We saw it again in some of our lifetimes in the crusade for disarmament in the 60s and 70s. Everywhere where there has been a popular movement against evils that corrode our world, the flag bearers have been teachers, students, and those who want to be and are willing to be educated. So education can simply not be undersold.
Thank you. Next, I invite Dr. Eun-hee Jung to join us once again and share her insights.
Thank you so much. I have so many comments I would like to share based on what Ramu just mentioned, but there have been so many valuable comments. I will just omit it and then try not to repeat. And I will specifically talk more about education in formal setting. And then we also have other speaker at the end who could talk more about the informal approach. So from now on, I'm going to go really deeply, closely into school system, how we can transform the education. If you can change the slide. Yeah. I titled 21st Century Quality Education for Global Citizenship, how we are going to transform our education system toward more inclusive and also quality-oriented education for learning together for global citizenship. So I would say this can be done through the systematic integration of ICC. It is about intercultural competence, SDGs, as you know, Sustainable Development Goals, and ICT, information and communication technology. I brought up these three elements as an approach to transform our education system. So here are key factors and framework. Systematic transformation toward 21st century quality education. What it means is there are three elements. We need to transform in a multi-level, with a multi-level role players. It shouldn't be just only by teacher or student or principal. And second, what is the 21st century competency? And also third, then what are the ingredients to make the quality education? Then we can pursue the global citizenship. So next. And first, systematic transformation of school education has many elements. You see community. Community has to be always related to the school education. As Dr. Naidu also said, Dr. Damodaran also said, community cannot be separated from the school education anymore. But the role player, we have students, what students going to learn, what students going to do through the school education, and teachers, how they're going to guide students to be more engaged in the civic needs and to work with the community and bring the community inside of the school and then impact on the community's need. And what is the school system? Principal, administrator, what they need to do. They have to have the goal, right? So the sustainable development goal comes there. And district and ministry, every country has their public education system. It cannot be, the education cannot be transformed by just only a single teacher or only one or principal's passion. It has to go systematically together. So there's a policy need. Flexible policy is very necessary these days. Next. And community also involved, please. So then what is the curriculum integration piece? What do you mean by curriculum integration? At the beginning, I said, what kind of competence do we need to be a global citizen? I would say that intercultural competence has 5 dimensions. And the 5 dimensions include actually very important part, actually that Ramu already mentioned, understanding yourself. Without understanding, being aware of yourself as a part of the large community, you cannot really compare with others. You cannot talk about other perspective or their needs. So awareness is very important. And then just you understand that, and then you have to know what others are dealing with, knowledge, and how you're going to deal with the issues to solve the matter creatively and critically. That's skill. And attitude, are you feeling it? Their needs. That's about attitude. And language proficiency, when you're communicating with the people from diverse culture, you will need to know how to appropriately and effectively communicate. That's language proficiency all together in a holistic manner. It becomes global intercultural competence, core competency for global citizens. So when you are integrating the curriculum with the different countries working together, you have to put common area and then redesign the activity to improve this intercultural competence. Next. And then your curriculum will be completed by having there at the background, the sustainable development goals also has to be integrated into this curriculum as ingredients. Next. And what is the ingredients for the quality education? Just being connected by technology doesn't mean it's quality education. Doesn't mean if you are talking with other people from different culture, that doesn't mean that's quality education. You need to have activity of communication and collaboration on certain issue based on understanding and respect for diversity, different cultures. And then you have to use creativity and critical thinking. Also through the cultural awareness, you can come up with a better solution. But most importantly, if you don't feel others' needs, how you're gonna solve this issue through your heart? That's global citizens' ingredient also, the competency. That's compassion, and you understand your perspective and action will impact on society. You have the responsibility. Those are the ingredients. Then students work to live together. Then we can make the quality education for humanity. That's third one. Next. So ICT, how we use ICT to connect the school classroom. We have already existing technology for the virtual communication. Next. And then also we can have video conferencing. Everybody already have this. Use already existing technology for the collaboration and communication. Next. And these are some example topic of the curriculum, quality education. We'll just introduce the screenshot, then I will move on. You can keep going on. And then students' activity like the one students working locally on issue they are having, they post it through the virtual classroom, and then next, the partner school reply to it to share their perspective, and they come up with the solution next. And the next one is they sometimes meet virtually using video conferencing next. And this is a global solution, become global solution. Although they are working in a local level, by communicating with each other, they can come up with a global solution next. And sometimes we bring them to the United Nations to make the bigger impact. So they are the students next. So out of this whole activity, this is my last slide. These are the teachers. We just had a good meeting, chatting around what they felt and realized from their students. These Brazilian teachers were even crying, saying, very poor students in her school walked to come to school many hours to do this global exchange activity. And then they feel like they are global, having global learning, and then working on the local issue. And the Korean teacher was saying, because we have the doctors here in the audience, one of the Korean students had a dream of being a doctor to make big, good money. But at the end, what he's having in their mind is he wants to be a doctor to provide the better health care to the all around the world, not only their own country, not only to make money, but to be helpful. That's the mindset. And then thirdly, the Guatemala teacher was saying is one of the very interesting experiences she has was elementary school students and the high school students were working with other countries on their climate action issue and globalization. What they are saying is they are so surprised. What they are having there in their country in Guatemala is also has some relationship with the Korea. So that is the biggest outcome they got. So that was an impressive outcome. So what I wanted to share, lastly, is by having this all ingredients, systematic support from the school, teacher, and the students, and then good ingredients of the curriculum, bring those students to become global citizens who care about local community, also impact globally. Try to be short so that I will wrap up my speech here. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunhee. I'd love to engage you on the question of how you're working to assess this student performance, but I think that question will have to wait for another moment because I'm very mindful of our time. Instead, I'd like to ask a shorter question, which is I'd love to hear a little bit more detail about that exchange between Korea and Guatemala on climate change. Could you just give us a little bit more descriptive sense of what made that connection so powerful for that teacher in Guatemala?
Assessment aspect,
Not the assessment, just that aha moment.
So was I speaking?
No.
Okay, all right. The Guatemala teacher was saying they were the topic of their social study class because we integrate their curriculum in a way they can build up the intercultural competence. And the title was Globalization and Climate Action. So their task was to come up with the real words, like their community experience, what kind of damage or impact they got in their industry by having globalization. And also, is there anything related to the climate change? And Guatemala students were saying during the live class, what they're saying is, we are actually agricultural. They are agricultural community, and then Korea was very modern city-like country. And then when they are presenting their life, they realize, oh, we are doing agriculture. We don't really produce all the pollution or CO2. But Korean students, when they are presenting it, they found they are the one who is actually producing all those the pollution and everything. Then what they are realizing is Guatemala students said, oh, we thought because we are agricultural, we don't need to deal with this climate action, and then doesn't need to be dealing with those things. But by seeing all those other countries are producing something damaging our society, actually we need to share what kind of impact we are having, and then engage them to work with us together. So at the end, Korean students also realized, oh, what we are doing is really impact on other neighboring country. So they are more aware of interconnected society and economy and everything. So then also globalization, they also found the agriculture, actually, they have strengths of having agriculture to export their product to the modern country, and while they're having the modern countries digitalized product. So they were actually, by exchanging their economic factor, they realized all those are connected. And the climate change, all these global issues really cannot be solved by one single country. They have to work together. That was their saying. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So this notion of, why not? This notion of student peer-to-peer learning and teaching, right? The students assume this role of becoming teachers and learners in these shared responsibilities and working internationally. This really can be kind of a profound shift in how we think about the classroom in the future, in addition to the community coming into the classroom. So without further ado, we have one more excellent panelist for you, Ms. Jediah Spencer. She's the Executive Director of the International Youth Leader Institute. So she's going to provide a slightly different perspective on this question.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to just say that I'm so full right now and so inspired by what I've heard just now from my fellow panelists. I'm over here scribbling notes, lifelong learning and whatnot. I'm just learning so much as I'm up here, and I hope that we've all been learning the same, too. One thing that comes to my mind is I've heard that we've been talking about education, but I think it's also important that we discuss what education actually is. And I've read that education, the word itself, has a double Latin root situation, where one of the meanings educare and educere, and one of the meanings of education in that Latin root is to bring out of someone that which is already in them. And so how often is it that students who experience education experience it within a classroom with rote memory, taking notes, memorizing, regurgitating in class for the test, maybe forgetting it the day afterward, and then carrying on, going on to the next thing. But the thing is that education truly has the power to shift our mindsets, which impacts our actions. It completely, for me, is my favorite sustainable development goal because of what it can do. So I want to introduce you to the work that I've experienced with the International Youth Leadership Institute. So if we could pull up that slide. So, So I represent the International Youth Leadership Institute, and our whole mission is to nurture a new generation of visionary leaders from the African diaspora who, inspired by their rich African heritage, are committed to leaving a legacy in the world. And so I serve as the executive director of this organization, but I know that the mission is so important because I myself, when I was a high school student, I was one of the students who we serve. So I came here like rushing to get here from the train because we were just with our students, but I'd like to explain to you what we do and why. So can we go to the next slide? So essentially, we were founded by two African-American men. It's interesting that you mentioned, Ramu, the anniversary of the 14th Amendment for citizenship today, because they were two African-American men who worked and lived in the continent of Africa, but when they would communicate with other African-Americans about like, well, the fact that they're living and working on the continent, like, you know, the media during that time, the narrative during that time around like what it meant to be of African descent was just like, why would you want to even associate with the continent itself? But the idea is that there was an issue here in the United States too among more marginalized communities in the African American community, whereas there was not so much able to see one, the beauty in themselves, because like intercultural communication and like expressing other people's kinds of history in the school system is not necessarily something that was prioritized, which is another way of saying in the United States, even to this day, unfortunately, some of our histories in this room are only considered elective courses, whereas others in the history is considered to be like the main course that everyone has to know, which is to say that many Black youth in the United States weren't really able to see themselves in the education that they were receiving. And then it leads to like the dropout rates. There's just so many aspects that come with that when you're not able to, one, see yourself in education, two, see yourself as someone and like what you see, three, being able to see yourself as someone who's actually able to make a change in the conditions, in the areas, in your own community. Making sense so far? Yeah. Y'all hear me? Yeah. Okay. So moving on. Actually, can you go back to the last slide? My bad. Yeah. So in addition to that, like bridging the gaps between like our communities is something that's exceedingly important, because if you're able to see yourself as these things, and then the next step is being able to see yourself in someone else and then extend that. So to the next slide. Like now, like these two men saw this issue and decided to actually do something about it and created the International Youth Leadership Institute. And so essentially what we do, we're training young people. We mainly started in the United States, but we now have been to like 17 different countries, have our office in Dakar and Senegal. And the idea is wherever we are, you know how, have you ever like walked past like something that you didn't like and thought, someone should do something about that? Has that ever happened to you? Yeah. So we tell our students that there's no waiting until you're older in order to be that someone. You get to start doing that right now. And so we train them how to do so. So next slide. So since they decided to actually do something about it and they sat down and dinner to have that conversation, IYLI has served over, 2,500. Actually, this is an old statistic. We're nearing like 3,000 now. I'm one of the 2,500 students that was served. Even though half of our students come to us with a C grade average or below, 100% of our students ended up graduating from high school. 94% of them end up going on to college. 100% of them say that our programs which facilitate travel to other countries to get to learn about history, culture, geography, and environment from people, from other youth along in that land, in facilitating that kind of fun intercultural communication. 100% of them say that it's life-changing. And then we also have thousands of projects around the world now centering around the Sustainable Development Goals. So I would just offer just one example. We've had some of our students who have been assisting their local governments in participatory budgeting, helping their communities figure out how to spend up to $2 million. Some of our other students have gone on to establish their own organizations that are now even bigger than us. Some of our students have gone on to create like job opportunities for others, establishing businesses and working around the world. And the idea is that youth everywhere, next slide, I'm gonna wrap up now. All right, get in touch, next slide. Like youth everywhere, assuming leadership roles and making the world a better place, like wherever it is that they are. And that goes back to that sense of ownership and responsibility that I've heard mentioned here as well, where it's like that we're not depending on other people necessarily to make the changes we want to see. And even around the world, you can see something happening from far away and still know that you can do something about it, and that the value of a human life, regardless of how many miles away it is from you, still matters. And this is what we're working to instill. Thank you very much.
Don't you just love to hear about life-changing programs? Doesn't that wake you up at 7:40 after a long day? could you give us a little deeper taste of what it is that you're doing with these students that allows them to see themselves in a way they maybe never had before?
Oh my gosh, it's such a fun question, first of all. I didn't know he was going to ask that, just for the record. Allowing yourself to see yourself as you never have before. I'll give you an example, right? So again, I lead this organization, and my predecessor was literally 3 times my age, but we walk the talk and really walk the walk when it comes to like youth leadership. So I remember when I was in high school, for those of you who might not know, I hail from the faraway land of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And so I've always wanted to see the world, but I never really had an opportunity to. I thought that, like plane rides, I thought that was kind of the stuff that only rich folk could do. And where I live, we call it the hood. And so, it's not rich. So that's like in essence. But the idea was, I just remember one day, I got a scholarship through IYLI to travel to Tanzania in East Africa. And I remember we learned Swahili at the University of Dar es Salaam. We visited the Rwanda war tribunals that are happening in Arusha, got to liaise with the diplomats face to face as merely high school students. And I just remember being in a market arguing over the price of like a bracelet in Zanzibar. And I remember thinking, I'm haggling in Swahili. What has my life become? How could it be that a child from the hood in Bedford-Stuyvesant might be able to do that? And I'm not the only one. There was me and my other friends who are all around me having the experiences, and then the hundreds of us, and then being able to come back and bring that to my community and being able to share with them like, hey, how can you do? Now my niece has traveled, I think, to more countries than I have, and just like the kind of ripple effects that can have is just the kind of beauty that comes with those kind of interactions. Honestly, is in those small moments, but we need to push in order to set the stage for those kinds of opportunities to happen. And we can do that for each other. And I think someone did that for me. I get to do that for other people now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully the panelists have given you something new to think about this evening. We're also hoping a couple of you have some questions. Very short and very focused questions is what we would prefer. We don't have a lot of time this evening, unfortunately, for Q&A, but we have about 10 or 12 minutes. To get that going, I'd like to invite Really Lapalainen from Bridge 47 to start us off with maybe a question for our panel or some comments, however you want to use that time, really.
Thank you, Scott. And congratulations, exactly all of us, because I think that exactly this is the first day in this house, exactly when we have talked so much about the global citizenship education. So I think that is really congratulations to all of us. And I really remember those days when we were exactly negotiating and trying to get the whole global citizenship education as a part of the STDs. I was heavily involved from the civil society side, and I think that thanks for the member states who were so brave, really ready to really add that on there. But I think that we have a role as well as a civil society to add on that. So congratulations for all of us. I would like to more comment than question about that, because I think all of you really covered quite a lot of absolutely sensitive and very important aspects what we need in the global citizenship education. And I think that we need to really think about that there are all kinds of educations which are needed. We have concentrate mainly about the global citizenship education, but I think that we need to keep in mind that we need to have the peace education, human rights education, education for sustainable development, you name it on that, but all of those are the absolutely fundamental in the reality where we are living. Another thing which I think that came out very well was that we are needing all the actors. It's not just the business of the member states or just about the schools or just about the NGOs, but it's everybody's business. We need to really cooperate quite along on that. And we need to really have this lifelong learning aspect on that, because exactly everything is so rapidly changing in this world. But we definitely need to find a ways where the technology, when the cooperation, the partnerships, all of these are the tools how we can really make this world better place together. Just the last sentence about the global, about the Bridge 47, which is the global network which brings together all the actors who are dealing with the global citizenship education, and how we really see that is that we need to exactly network. We need to exactly find the ways, but we need to do the advocacy as well, which hasn't really mentioned yet. And this might be the one point which might be nice to hear your comments from the panel, because I think that we need to still push the governments, we need to push the local authorities, we need to push schools, we need to push even the civil society to exactly take more responsibilities, that we can really have the recognition of the global citizenship education in the formal setup, because without that recognition we can't really implement, and that's really one of the points which I would really welcome your comments on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we return back to the panel, because we are very tight on time, let me invite 4 more people to make very short comments, questions, preferably the questions. Yep. Yes. I'm forgetting your name, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is...
Behind you, sorry. Jeff, sorry.
Sorry, Jeffrey Huffines with Civicus in the UN 2020 initiative. I have a quick question, really directed to Jediah and to Ramu. If you could speak to the relationship of global citizenship education to the survival of multilateralism, and in particular, this living ideal called the United Nations, with the rise of populist nationalism and unilateralism as we prepare for the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the UN next year. Just a small question, thank you.
Excellent question. So the woman who's immediately in front of Jeff, who I don't know, why don't you go next?
My name is Amanda Granick. I'm the NGO representative for World Council of Conservative Masorti Synagogues. My question is basically, we talked a lot about partnerships. I would like to kind of hear from some of the panelists their thoughts on partnerships between, say, the UN, schools, governments, civil society, and also cultural institutions within society, such as museums and memorials and such, and how what they see as their way forward of kind of working collaboratively together to kind of build that global citizenship.
Thank you. In the back, with your hand up, yep.
For giving me the floor, Miriam from the mission of the Kingdom of Morocco. Just to thank all the organizers for this very interesting event, and which all the panelists were very diligent in providing very specific illustrations of what global citizenship is capable of doing in terms of positive transformation. Now, my question is, and this goes back to the element of global citizenship. It enables youth and individuals to be active and operational wherever they go in the world. It's not even linked to their own specific environments, but it makes of them those global citizens, especially now that migration is becoming a global trend and is actually impacting every single society around the world. But when it comes to partnerships and how can you empower this kind of global citizenship, especially for the most vulnerable populations? Because when I was hearing the young lady from the US go into a Eastern African country, that was a tremendously interesting experience to listen to. Now, what about all the kids who don't necessarily have the financial means to make such an international experiment? And also because such a situation or such an education should also be provided to people who do have the interest to live such a transformative page of their own lives and become impactful citizens in their own societies. So that was my question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
We got
Thanks.
it. Thank you. Yes, up here.
My question is for Ms. Chung. Ma'am, can we suggest and plan some action research projects for teachers in the classroom? I'm a head teacher of Kamala Nehru Public School from India. Some action research for global citizenship. Some projects can be planned. Thank you.
Who's saying that? All the way up top. We do need one question from up top, and that will close
I hope you
us.
hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the opportunity. Now, I have a question, or rather expert advice from Dr. Jadea Spencer. I live in New Jersey, and I'm leading a community outreach initiative, which is education, innovation, and leadership, to give some additional resources for the especially Sri Lankan community who lives around New Jersey and other areas and New York. So my purpose of coming here is, I'm thankful for every one of you here, to ask you to affiliate, and whether if it is possible to affiliate my organization, that is a kind of leadership and education, innovation, and community service. So if it is possible, I want to work with, especially Ms. Jadea Spencer, if I pronounce your name correctly. So please, before I leave, I would love to hear how and when I can connect my organization, which has already been running for 3 years. I need some international exposure, rather working with other communities.
We'll hold it there. We've got that message, and what I'd like to do is turn it back to the panel.
Thank you.
Jediah, we'll start with you. Maybe you want to respond to that gentleman or one specific question, and then each of the panelists can respond in kind to very quickly one panel. So you each have about 60 seconds.
Yes, sir, let's talk. To the person about asking partnerships for cultural institutions, repetitive action creates culture. So if you keep seeing the same ideas from the university to the city government to the museums, if these organizations are talking and can get center on one or two or even three things that we feel like everyone in our locality needs to know, I think that would be a good place to start. As far as global citizenship education and helping surviving multilateralism, yes, absolutely. I think that it's the kind of empathy that it creates, because I'm thinking about, we were just with our students today at the museum, the Metropolitan Museum, and seeing the beauty of Japanese culture, for example, inspired one of our students to say, gosh, I want to go to Japan, which goes to the question of our Moroccan sister, Miss Mariam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's if the idea of being able to see for yourself. So I got to clarify that the International Youth Leadership Institute fundraised really, really, really hard in order to make my experience possible. It cost a lot of money, and I paid hardly a dime. And that's kind of what it takes, to be honest, in order to make these things accessible, because I agree with you 100,000% that everything that we're saying, I don't want to call it meaningless, but it means just a little bit less if not everyone gets to experience it. And I think that we all should have the heart and the spirit to be to try to reach out to those who are practically unreachable, because if not for that, then at the end of the day, what are we really saying? So I think that, again, financial access, especially for young people, is something that I really can't stress enough, is honestly such a huge hurdle. And for those of us to think about how might we leverage business, leverage partnerships, leverage ourselves, leverage our individuals, our family, whatever it is that it takes, to make sure that we can reach those of us who otherwise might not have that access. Because yeah, we are only as strong as our weakest links. So thank you.
Eun-hee, a response to one question, maybe?
Okay, so I will try to answer one question, but it's actually related. So I will answer one, but can cover maybe all the questions. Multilateralism and partnership and empowerment of the underserved, the population who does not have much money to make travel for those kind of trip, and also what could be the teacher's action to make this impact. And just conclusion, when you put those young people together and let them work on their local issue and share their perspective with each other through technology-facilitated learning platform, that's not expensive, then what they can do is, by working on their local issue, they can look at themselves closely and realize what they have not known before and what they can do. Then by sharing it, they are more aware of interconnectedness. Then they start caring of others. When you provide this kind of learning activity, students can see themselves as a change maker, and at the end what they are saying is, I know I'm the future. And then I know we have the ability, by working on this solution, and this work together could not be done by school itself, but by having the corporations support and then all the government policy enabling the school to work on the global citizenship and teachers' capacity to provide this learning activity, that all those things together make this change happen.
Thank you.
That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, thank you.
Ramu, in 35 seconds.
Thank you. I think, as Jeff mentioned, the importance, I think, of UN 75 next year is not so much looking back on 75 years, but trying to envision what the United Nations will be like in 2045, when we are 100 years old. And that really depends upon what we are now talking about as global citizenship education. The Foreign Minister of Tunisia, Mr. Genaoui, when he spoke at the General Assembly, said, we must immunize our societies, especially youth, from the attractions of terrorism. And that's a very powerful word, immunize. And if you think of the number of things that we have to immunize society against, education is the key. It need not be formal. It can be one-way communication. It can be two-way communication. It can be a multilateralism of a community of interest. So multilateralism has gone beyond being between nations or governments. It's now a multilateralism of civil society organizations, education institutions. It's truly a multilateralism of peoples. And that is really going to be the heart of what we call GCED.
Perfectly timed. Holly.
I'm inspired. I think that in general, we know that we need to have partnerships and collaborate. I'd like to put in a plug for, I'm in addition to the chair of the NGO Committee on Mental Health, I'm the recently elected chair of the NGO Committee on Education, Learning, and Literacy. I have some colleagues here, and I would encourage all of you, especially the young people, to join us, because the UN itself is a forum for collaboration. And I'm always telling my students, don't wait till you're an expert. You can make a contribution and keep learning now. So I would encourage you all to join. And teaching and learning is a two-way street. At our Commission on the Status of Women, we had a magnificent presentation by a 20-year-old Lehigh University student who presented a barcode that her NGO was adapting from Nigeria. And in the barcode was a whole set of women's health, reproductive rights, and staying healthy resources. The IT director of a large metropolitan hospital stood up and said, can you teach me how to use that, because I have thousands of staff and patients and we never thought of using a barcode. So education and learning goes two ways. It's not us just teaching everyone what we think they ought to know, but really providing a format for them to share with us what their skills are. And we can do it in our NGO Committee on Education, Learning, and Literacy. So I hope you join us.
Holly. And so we'll close out today with some final, very brief comments from Jordan.
Yeah, I'll be brief. This afternoon in the education plenary debate, there were a number of speakers who said we need a revolution in education. And I think part of that revolution is to make sure global citizenship education is a part of every child, youth, and adult's education in a lifelong learning way of educating people.
So I want to thank all of you. I think this has been a very informative and exciting program that we've put together for you. In response to some of the questions about multilateralism and building basically a global social movement around these kinds of education reforms, there is an initiative to create an International Day of Education for Global Citizenship here at the UN. Some of us on the panel are, behind that effort, and we'd encourage all of you to hear more about that and get involved directly with that effort. We think that plays one small but critical role in that effort to build this out globally. So thank you all, and good luck with the rest of the conference.